How's it going, everybody? As the Daybreak show continues on this morning, I'm really happy to have on the air via Zoom video conference representing the 6th District of the great state of Washington is Representative Derek Kilmer. Derek, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you, my friend, and we are moving into a very exciting time here across the country with the COVID numbers and the vaccination rates going up and up. We are right on the edge of that 70% threshold that the governor is looking for, and we're excited about hearing some maybe sooner than the end of June reopenings, but it's been a trying year. Tell me a little bit about how it's been going since we last talked from your perspective.
Well, listen, obviously this last year has been the pits for a whole lot of people. And, I've had, actually, I'll tell you, probably the most important decision I made in the last year was not a vote I cast or a position I took on a specific issue. It was a commitment I made that if one of the folks I represent reached out to my office having lost a job or lost a business or lost a loved one because of this pandemic, that I would reach out to them directly rather than I wasn't going to send them a form letter. And I got to tell you, the conversations that I have had absolutely informed my work over this past year and absolutely gave me a sense of urgency about wanting to help. I spoke with a woman on the peninsula. She said, I've worked my entire life. She said, I used to organize the food drive for my employer. And she said, for the first time in my life, I had to go visit the food bank because I couldn't feed my family. And so when the Congress passed the American Rescue Plan earlier this year, to me, that was about helping her. It was about making sure she could put food on her table and others could too. And we're seeing that American Rescue Plan really start to make a difference in helping people. Listen, there's still folks who are struggling, but it has really had a positive impact in terms of addressing food insecurity and housing insecurity and other economic insecurity. I talked with a small business owner. He said, gosh, I spent decades building my business. And he said, I'm just really struggling to make it through. And so when Congress passed the American Rescue Plan, I got to tell you, I was thinking about that guy and other businesses like him, and their employees, because it was about extending the Paycheck Protection Program and providing some new grant-based resources to restaurants and bars and to coffee shops and to some of these businesses that have been really hard hit. And we're seeing the benefit of that. I started my day visiting with the local Chamber of Commerce, and the number of small businesses who are like, man, I got to tell you, but for this help, we'd be really hosed. That is good news, and we're starting to see some, positive turns in terms of the economy. You mentioned the vaccination. I talked to a guy, and he was just anguished talking about not being able to visit his mom in the hospital before she died from this virus. And so part of my push in supporting the American Rescue Plan is to ensure that we're getting more shots into more arms more quickly. And you're absolutely right. We're making progress there. We're starting to see people, our numbers are looking better and better in terms of vaccination. And that'll make a real difference in terms of hopefully seeing fewer people get this virus and hopefully seeing our economy turn back to some sense of normalcy.
When I was looking at kind of the numbers and we're getting close to that threshold of 70%, I noticed in there that the numbers that for folks who get vaccinated through the VA or through JBLM or through the various federal programs aren't counted into maybe our state numbers here. And that leads me into my next question, where you had a chance to kind of address the VA and figure out how to improve veterans' access to healthcare. You had some pretty pointed words to the folks you were talking to.
Yeah, listen, I represent a district. We all live in an area that has more military veterans than perhaps nearly any other region in the country. That is a strength for our region, that we have men and women who serve this country and after their service choose to make this their home. And one of my ethics in this job and before I was in this job is, frankly, if you serve this country, we ought to have your back. And that means that our veterans should get the care and the benefits that they've earned. And unfortunately, I think the VA has come short of that. There is the capacity to, under what was called the VA Mission Act, to get care in the community. And that has been a more bureaucratic process than it should have been. We've seen, particularly in some of the rural parts of the region, an inadequate network of primary care providers. And so we've been banging this drum. I've been banging this drum for a while, and recently we had myself and Congresswoman Strickland led a letter signed by every member of the Washington State delegation to the VA saying, in short, VA Puget Sound and Tri-West, which is the contractor that does the community-based care, they need to do better. And we called out some specific areas in which they need to do better. Because again, we've heard from veterans who aren't getting the response, and in some instances aren't getting the care that they need, and that's not okay. In my view, this is about upholding commitments to people who've served our country and to whom promises were made, and those promises need to be kept.
Another thing that I know you're heavily involved with is rural broadband and the access throughout the district. The Emergency Broadband Benefit Program is going on now. iFiber Communications, Hood Canal Communications, the whole host of service providers are getting information out to folks there, and that's a benefit too.
Absolutely. This is something that I pushed for the creation of this emergency broadband benefit. Listen, over the course of this public health crisis, we've seen just how reliant we are on access to the internet. Education moved online. A bunch of our health appointments moved to telehealth. Small businesses who were trying to sell products without, when their storefront was shut down. And for far too many of the folks I represent, they've struggled to have that access. And unfortunately, some folks have struggled to afford it. And so that's why this Emergency Broadband Benefit Program was created, to make internet more affordable for families all across our region. So what is it? The Emergency Broadband Benefit Program is a new program that aims to help folks who are struggling just to afford their monthly internet bill. It will provide families with a discount of $50, or for those who are on tribal lands, up to $75 off of the monthly cost of home internet service. It can also be used to receive a discount for the purchase of a laptop or a desktop or a tablet computer. That is important because we know that having more folks online can help our local employers, it can help our students, it can help rural communities get in on the economic growth. And so you mentioned two terrific providers in our neck of the woods that are tapped into that program. Folks who want to learn more, there's a website. It's just getemergencybroadband.org, and they can learn more about it and sign up through your internet service provider.
Let's switch to some rare bipartisanship, I guess. Not often do we hear a lot of headlines about bipartisan legislation making its way through, but there's some new housing legislation that you have in the works.
There is, and listen, our region and our country faced housing challenges before any of us had even heard of COVID. Unfortunately, those challenges have been exacerbated by the pandemic. Part of this is we need more housing. We need more workforce housing. We need more affordable housing. We need more senior housing. We need more homeless housing. We need more housing units, period. We're about 10 to 12 million housing units short nationwide. And we see that in our neck of the woods. We need more housing units throughout the Olympic Peninsula, and in, frankly, every nook and cranny of the district I represent. Solving that there's not a silver bullet to solving that. It's more like silver buckshot. There's a bunch of stuff we got to do. And you've seen President Biden in his proposed infrastructure plan include housing funding as part of that. I'm a sponsor of a bill to expand the low-income housing tax credit. But to your point, we just introduced a bipartisan bill that's bipartisan both in the House and in the Senate, called the Yes in My Backyard Act. And the goal is to help communities in our region and around the country reduce barriers to housing construction. You've seen zoning and land use policies that in some instances will stifle construction. And as those regulations have increased, they've resulted in fewer homes being built and in costs going up. And that's really the target of this Yes in My Backyard Act, is to push local governments to eliminate those discriminatory land use policies, remove barriers that prevent housing from being built, and hopefully empower communities to have a clear path to having more housing and more affordable housing. And here's what's cool. Not only is it bipartisan, but you've seen over 250 local and national organizations all over, everyone from the AARP to Habitat for Humanity to the home builders to the Low Income Housing Coalition have all endorsed this bill because they think it'll help drive more affordable housing and drive, hopefully, address some of the challenges that we faced with housing and homelessness.
You mentioned the infrastructure bill. That is a topic of national conversation. Also, the voting rights bill that the House passed out, and now it's kind of sitting in the Senate there. Do you have any comments on moving those bills forward? I heard somebody interestingly put it that maybe you start breaking those up into separate, different parts of the bills as opposed to one huge 800-page bill that you can pass fully. If there's things that early access or mail-in ballots for the voting one particular, if you can get those small wins on the Senate side to help complement what you guys passed in the House?
Yeah, certainly the large democracy reform bill, the For the People Act, has three parts to it. Part focused on voting rights, part focused on reducing the role of big money in politics, and part focused on ethics reform so that the American public has confidence that decisions are being made in their interest, not in someone's personal interest or political interest. I support that bill. I'm a co-sponsor of it. But there are, to your point, component pieces of that. Honestly, I don't think that the comprehensive bill, I don't think it should be partisan. None of those three things is necessarily a Democratic thing or a Republican thing. It should just be about refreshing our democratic republic. And I think that makes sense. Having said that, to your point, there are component pieces of that are very bipartisan. I'll give you a couple examples. There's two bills within that broader bill that I'm the lead sponsor of. One, to reform the Federal Election Commission to get our referee back on the field to blow the whistle on politicians that cheat. That's a bipartisan reform bill that has Republican support and Democratic support. Similarly, I've got a bill called the Honest Ads Act so that we have the same disclosure and transparency requirements that currently exist for TV and radio, have those applied to online political ads. That's bipartisan. That is wildly bipartisan in both the House and in the Senate. Those are just two examples of things that if they were put on the floor of the House or of the Senate could pass with broad bipartisan support. Beyond that, I am very hopeful that you'll see passage of a new Voting Rights Act. You saw a Supreme Court decision a few years back, the Shelby County versus Holder decision that really took the teeth out of the Voting Rights Act. And unfortunately, now you've seen some jurisdictions try to erect barriers to voting. And, listen, my grandma became an American citizen at the age of 87. And in the 22 years that she was alive before she passed, just shy of her 109th birthday, she was such a proud American, and she was a voter. And making sure that the systems that are in place work for everybody, including my grandma, is really important to me. And unfortunately, you're seeing some jurisdictions in some parts of our country erect barriers, that would limit early voting, limit mail-in voting, make it so that if you're stuck in a long line, you can't get, food or water, which again doesn't pass the My Grandma test. I think it's really important that we have a new Voting Rights Act and protect people's right to vote. You mentioned the infrastructure bill. I also think there's real opportunity there. There's no such thing as a Democratic road or a Republican bridge. We know that there's broadband access issues, as we just discussed. There's housing issues, as we just discussed. Whether you're in red districts, blue districts, or purple districts, American infrastructure, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers, grades out at a C-. And I wouldn't be particularly psyched if my daughters came home with a C- on their report card. And no American should be content with a C- when it comes to our economic competitiveness. And so there's discussions underway. We'll see. The crystal ball is still a little bit fuzzy about exactly how this plane is going to land, but I know that there's interest in seeing something get done. I certainly share that interest because I think it can put people to work now and lay the foundation for economic growth in our region, certainly over the long haul.
He represents the 6th Congressional District here in the state, but he has eyes on everybody in Washington, making sure they are getting the benefits from the federal government. It's Congressman Derek Kilmer. Good to see you, and thanks for spending some time with me.
You bet. You take care.